Don, if I could start with you, I'm curious, when you were designing the Civ at EGADS, did you have any of the same difficulties or conflict that Bridget seemed to experience in trying to identify what that success metric would be?
I don't think we had the same kind of difficulties that Bridget had. It was based on how much money that we were going to save by keeping children out of care. And so we didn't have those struggles. Our struggles came with the bureaucracy kind of later on.
The program has had quite a bit of success, the EGADS program. Is there plans for the future to bring that or to expand it so that more Saskatchewan families can access it?
The challenges that Saskatchewan have right now, government can't afford them. And the reality is we need to bring all of the tools to the game. And if that means doing more of what Don's doing, if that's what the success model does, I think we have to explore that. Obviously, it's coming close to an end, and decisions will have to be made. If you look at the state of Saskatchewan, we finish almost last in a number of social issues, and we spend the second most amount of money. And that's not the government of the day. That's been there way before this government came in. So this isn't a government issue. This is how we get to outcomes, how we measure outcomes, and how we deliver results. So.
What is the how then, Dale?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the hubs and you mentioned that, right? So the how started with data. We basically had to look at what we were doing. Were we doing the right things? I was a police chief. When I started being police chief, our arrest rate in Prince Albert was 2,950. 8 years in, it was 6,850. The reality is it was heading north to 8,000, and what's changed? Nothing. So it's basically trying to find a new way using data, get other people involved, and actually use R&D. I mean, I think one of the biggest advantages that we had from the hub is we actually went to Scotland, very much like Civ's went. We came back, we built a program that's actually further advanced because it's a second level of business. So if they come back, they would leverage us. But the same thing, they don't work. They don't work. You know, it's going to take jobs away. It's going to do this. The reality is there's enough work in this province for everybody. And there's 107 of them, and we still got people saying they don't work. And that's across North America, including the US. So at what point do we move trying to convince people to actually just focusing on the things that work? Because the people that matter in that are the people getting the services.
Larry, did you want to comment maybe on why so many different governments are experimenting with Civ? So the Harper government, the Trudeau government, Trump, Obama, it doesn't seem to matter, you know, what party you're from.
Fair enough. Let me just say I seem to have managed for the first time ever in my career to annoy a fellow panelist. That's never had that happen before.
That's me.
I've met Sir Roger. I actually debated Sir Roger in front of a UN panel. He's a very convincing individual. He's a believer in his program. He's a proselytizer. He goes out and sells it. I'm sure he sold it to governments very successfully. What he glosses over is the fundamental flaws in what he's talking about. And there's a number of reasons why governments like to latch onto that kind of program. It makes it look like they're being active and sort of responding to the issues, when in fact, if the issue is province-wide and there's a program in Prince Albert, that's not exactly responding to the issue. That's basically passing the buck and letting people think that it's a real active solution, when in fact it's a very small solution to a very large problem. It isn't just the people who get the services in a social impact fund. It's all the rest of the people in society that have the same problem that aren't getting that service because somebody hasn't figured out how to make a profit from it. That's a real core problem, and governments don't like to address that. They like to address the argument that they're being active. And look, when a government sets up any kind of privatization, and this is a form of privatization, it's taking services out of the direct public delivery and moving it to the private sector, it means that the government is no longer answerable for the way that service is delivered. So there's reasons that governments like it, but the fundamental test is does it change the way that society operates? Or could one argue that many of the problems that social impact bonds are trying to address comes out of a very fundamentally out of control economic system that social impact bonds do nothing more than propagate. And that's a sort of interesting question.
And Cindy, you designed a social impact bond here in Saskatchewan, and I have to say it's very unusual compared to the ones that I've looked at in other parts of the world. You know, the return is 1.3%, and the investors don't see any money back for 7 years. I've never heard of a deal like that. How did you do that?
Well, and I can only speak for my knowledge from the Mother Teresa Middle School side of things. Really what we were facing is that originally when it came forward, it was higher. I believe it was 4 or 5%, similar to the EGADS one. However, we were facing some pretty significant cuts in education and across the board for our province, a very difficult economic time. So the feeling was it would be challenging to take it through multiple levels of government, ultimately to Treasury Board, to have them support this at a high level and be able to position that to the public effectively and have the public understand why they would be paying interest for this small private school instead while they're making general cuts to education across the province. The other piece to that I will say is that, you know, with our investor, the Mosaic Company, their motivation was not to make money. So, you know, I understand from a perspective, particularly out east, might be a little bit different than Saskatchewan. But for them, it was about being able to get on board with an innovative social financing tool. And to do that through their foundation, as opposed to their community investment. Because they would normally be investing quite a significant amount in our community and our province. But this gave them the opportunity to not be able to take, or to be able to not take away from the dollars that they were investing locally, and instead pull funds from their corporate foundation to fund this. So their motivation, again, was not the rate of return that they were getting back. And I do know, in hearing from conversations with June and others, that even with the EGAS one, the investors were not motivated by the return, and in fact, as I understand, intend to reinvest funds when they receive the money back.
So do you still consider that a SIP?
Yes, absolutely. It's just they're differently motivated. So I think, you know, when you're looking at centers like Toronto or big centers in the US, when you're talking to Goldman Sachs and big banks, they are very motivated by the returns.
Yeah.
I just want to expand on what Cindy's saying. So
We're caught up on the one thing called the social impact bond, and what we're really building is an ecosystem for change that has an investment portfolio that you can actually apply different things. So you saw Stephen Huddard in the video from McConnell Foundation, things like challenges, things like social impact bonds, things like pay for success, or some mentioned the tax incentive. What you're really building is an ecosystem to do R&D in government. If you look at it from a government perspective, you got 4 options really. What are you going to do? Raise taxes, get unelected? That's an option. What are you going to do? Are you going to grow a money tree? I don't see many of them growing. You know, the third thing is you can drastically upset your public service sector and say we're going to stop doing this. That isn't going to work because you're going to have the same complaints here. Or you could bring other resources to the table through public, private, and philanthropy to do co-design and co-measurement and have better evaluation. And ultimately what you do is you change the whole system. So, you know, they started it in the UK just like they did the hubs, but we don't do hubs like they do. So I think Cindy's bang on when you're seeing how many people are invested for different reasons. I think Saskatchewan's unique to lead that.
I want to jump in, if I could, on the question of, gee, government's got no money. Isn't that mysterious, they got no money? We actually do, as the person in the movie very convincingly said it, we're actually twice as wealthy as a society as we used to be. And something has gone really wonky with the distribution system. And yeah, it does involve actually that governments have let corporations and the wealthy off the hook for taxation. It has to involve that. But if I could finish, I'll try to finish quickly, I promise. The idea that somehow this is about freeing up resources so that the government can use resources that they wouldn't otherwise have is quite frankly not realistic. There are other words I could have chosen, but I'll be really nice tonight. Look, if social impact bond works, all of the original investment is repaid, along with interest and along with all of the money that the government has to spend to monitor the thing, plus the profit. So there is no saving. to government from the social impact bond, period. A successful social impact bond costs the government more than doing it themselves. So it isn't a question of scarce resources, it's a question of using the resources in an entirely different way, which is to channel it in the direction of profit instead of in the direction of public service.
I just want to respond to that. I started government didn't have any money, so let's make that very clear. I
So
said,
they didn't have the money.
no, I said that what they do is if they actually stop doing a lot of things they're doing, so in Saskatchewan, to go to the landscape, highest Hep C, highest HIV, highest domestic violence, highest crime rate, and the list goes on, 17 or 18. It's all public service there. I have one of the largest. They're great people. They do a lot of good work for the government, but the reality is it needs R&D to change what we're doing. And as you know, in the real world, just to go and say we're changing paths, I'll leave it at that.
If I could just make a comment about SIBs not saving money. I would agree with you that the way that the SIBs have been set up and the amount of time that is taken and resources, I think all costs haven't been taken into consideration, and that is one of the key issues that we have with SIBs around the world. But in our case with Mother Theresa Middle School, through several discussions with Clint and even with June when she was at the table at the beginning, was to keep it very simple. We didn't need intermediaries, the metrics were there, and they were independent enough that it proved the success or not success. But also, we went through extensive research in looking at what the potential cost savings were to achieve those outcomes. And that was based on data. That was based on research from the University of Simon Fraser University. And when we took all of those numbers, if we achieved success and we paid back the investment in full, plus the amount of interest, we still looked at a very significant cost savings. That was everything included. And when you have internal legal through government, and the company had internal legal, we didn't use an intermediary, as I mentioned, and we kept the outcome simple. It was based on one outcome. We looked at multiple outcomes, and the proposal that I put forward did have multiple layers. And I know one of the comments in the documentary was they need multiple layers, but do they really? Because those other outcomes were maybe a track measurement of progression of success, but the ultimate outcome was going to determine what that cost savings was because we had the data to support that.
I can just add that one of the reasons some people are arguing for multiple measures is so that they can learn and improve the practice because they see how people are evolving. I think that's one of the reasons that people are asking for more measures as they're going through.
I guess what I want to say is, I think what I want to say is that we are a kind and compassionate community. The Wally Cully Ma and the folks from Conexus Credit Union are not the Goldman Sachs, where profit is most important. They're community-minded people that wanted to make a difference. They are what makes Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan. If the status quo is deficient, which it is, and if it can't manage much innovation, it can, then it lacks relevance in meeting actual day-to-day social needs. It is thus limited by the willingness, moreover, of the ability of politicians to stump up those resources for immediate concerns. Over time, the bureaucracy gets focused on immediate concerns and making sure that nobody in crisis does better than anyone else, that only eligible people get help. Then there's the private sector donor who wants to help with social concerns, but wants to see and measure their assistance in making a difference. They want to be relevant. If they can't have that, then they can continue to contribute via paying taxes, but will believe that their contribution essentially falls into a black hole. I don't think that it's necessary to let private contributors define social objectives, but I fail to see why they can't have input given that we are dealing with their money. The reality is that bureaucracy cannot be innovative in social services because of political fear and budget limitations. So if we can't innovate to get longer term outcomes, what the heck else do we do here? Do we just leave social services alone and walk away? Do we allow the ministry to continue to be held hostage by organizations that want to continue to do the same old with outcomes that have not been successful for years? Maybe it's time to admit that what we're doing isn't working. and to look at innovative approaches that is culturally sensitive and holistic in nature. Let's quit blaming drugs for everything and really take a closer look at how we are responding to current situations. Because over the past 4 years, we have received calls from abused mothers trapped in situation in basements, in hostels, that kept their children at risk of apprehension but felt hopeless to family members. They continue to call us begging to help keep their family members and children safe. Since the home was purchased, we've added 4 bedrooms upstairs to have the ability to take mothers with multiple children. I think the most important factor here is that it works, and the benefit over the long term is that mothers will care for their own children, and by keeping these families together over the long term will save taxpayers in the tens of millions of dollars. Once our 6-month bond stops and the bond is paid off, the longer we keep these children out of the care, the payroll just keeps ticking with the cost savings. And it keeps our children out of care. If you think our system is so perfect and wonderful, ask the mothers whose children are taken away from them because of history, because of past drug use. Why is it okay for us to believe that people building roads, construction companies, and all these working in the human services industry to make a profit, but those investing in people and innovative ideas which can and do make a difference are frowned upon? We're fortunate to have the Moz and Connexus Credit Union on our corner. If they were so worried about their money, why are they giving back the initial $500,000 investment plus interest to do more for mothers and their children? I want to know what alternatives critics of these can offer. Because just keeping the status quo and trying harder has been done to death with very little to no success and a huge waste of time, money, and more trauma to the clients we're serving. And this is by one of our young ladies who has graduated. She came into the program. They were going to take her 8-year-old son. She was involved in games. She was drug addicted. But she posted on Facebook, and I think it's important to share, because if you want to share outcomes, can I please share this? Over 2 years ago, I walked into a sober living home, which was Sweet Dreams, with only a garbage bag full of clothes. As time went on, working my butt off, which was never an ending battle, and stress within myself. I literally had to learn how to socialize and use my motor functions again. My hard work started paying off. I got into university and was employed in this very same house as a mentor to other people, kids. I just want to say thank you to everyone at EGADS that has helped me through my struggles and finding myself. I know life is only going to get better from here. So that's what I want to say.
I mean, I have to say, in making this film, I spent 3.5 years doing this. Everyone I talked to, no matter how they feel about SIDS, they all agreed on a few things. One is prevention. Everyone seemed to want to refocus on prevention. Evaluation. People want to know that what we're doing works. And they want to put more money into it. Everybody does. But I think where the disagreement comes is, where is that money going to come from? And, you know, how are we going to decide what we're funding? So.
There was a question directed to me by my colleague here that I would like just a brief chance to answer, which is, what's the alternative? The alternative that I live and that my members live every day is not a perfectly well-funded social service system that's got money coming out of its ears and everybody is well paid. There's enough money for every program you can dream of. It's the exact opposite. For years and years and years, public services, including social services, have been frozen in funding, have been cut in funding, people have been laid off, there's more work for fewer people. So the alternative is not somehow this magically perfectly functioning public service that's malfunctioning somehow even though it's well funded. The alternative, with respect, I'm not trying to say that my two colleagues on the other side are there's something wrong with what you're doing, that you're bad people, for heaven's sake. I'm talking about social policy. the alternative to bringing in private money that's going to be making money from it on average, not very much in your case, but on average, the alternative is actually to build a well-functioning public service. And we've had 10, 20 years of cuts. And that's the alternative that people are facing. You know, we're not judging the existing public service based on a model that's working well because we've had governments that have made sure that it won't.
Right on. Right on.
Dale, yeah.
I don't think it's money that's gonna fix the problem anyway. I think it's R&D because the money's in the system, as we talked about earlier. But I'm more interested in a question to you because I think part of what we're learning is you've been across basically the world entertaining this. And I'm interested to know why these two things can't coexist. Like, where did a SIP ever come up with the idea that it's gonna take away from public service? Last time we checked, we got a lot of wicked problems and probably enough work for 100 years for everybody with all hands on deck. So I'm wondering if anybody give you any insight to that as why it's one or the other, because I can't see this being anything other than a coexistence. But it is, as Dawn has very, very well articulated, is how are we going to do things different?
Well, I think people are looking for it initially. I mean, what Caroline was saying in the film is that it was intended to be a coexistence. You know, that SIBs were supposed to test these innovative programs like Dawn's, like Peterborough, and then once it was proven effective, the public service would take it over, fund it, expand it. Because even J.B. Pritzker was saying this, there just isn't enough money in the philanthropic community. Most of the investors in the UK and a lot here as well, it's philanthropic. There's very little commercial investors that are interested in this. So I think they could coexist if there was really an intention to move in that direction. But if you look at the Peterborough SIB, you know, they stopped it after the second cohort. They started something called Transforming Rehabilitation. Everyone from that offender population that was being treated in Peterborough is now being treated by private companies, sometimes for-profit, sometimes non-profit. They're all underfunded because it's outcome-based contracting. And so they spend most of their time reorganizing themselves because they're trying to deal with a funding shortfall. So they're constantly restructuring instead of delivering the service. And then when they are delivering the service, it's very substandard. And this is not my opinion. This has been like 3 years of audits done in the UK. So maybe they can coexist, but that doesn't seem to be the direction they've gone in.
I guess what I'm asking you is what lessons can you pass on to this group so we don't make the same mistakes? Because the last thing we need to do is start doing what the UK has learned from. And is there anything that you can pass on that you've seen that's a no-do?
Well, there's one in South Carolina actually that I saw that looked pretty interesting. It's young mothers who are at risk, first-time mothers. They have a family nurse visiting them at home. They help to, you know, make sure that both baby and mom are healthy. It's a 5-year program, and there is a plan afterward for it to be taken over by Medicaid. And so it's built in that there's a handoff at the end of it. And all of the money, like in Dawn's program, is being put back into the program.
So they're using it for R&D.
Yeah. But the profit is reinvested in the program, and there's an exit strategy, I guess you could say.
But really, I think that is the intent. You know, if you look at the UK, the intent of SIBS was to bridge that gap between programs that wouldn't normally be funded by government, but testing them, offsetting that risk to government so that if it doesn't succeed, government's not out any money. And I think that's one of the things we don't take into consideration is that if we don't achieve those outcomes, the government doesn't have to pay a penny back.
That's actually not, that's not the average social impact bond. The average social impact bond has a significant guarantee built into it, so that the investor at most is going to lose maybe a quarter of their investment. Most of it is guaranteed by the government going in, and that's part of the contract.
And I would agree with you, that's part of the problem with the two that the federal government has done. In the case of Mother Theresa Middle School, we have a second level that is if 75% is achieved as opposed to 82%, the investor would get back 3/4 of their investment. But even in achieving that, we still have the data to support that's still a significant cost savings to government. So even, do you know what I mean? So it's the way that, the problem is the way that the SIBs are structured.
I think there's a problem with everything that we do in our society. And I'm saying that there's nothing that we do is perfect, right? But we seem to have this real issue of people. We're investing in people, right? We stand up and we clap every time the budget's out. Well, we're getting new roads, we're getting new highways, we're getting new this. I don't want to invest in public service. I want to invest in people, the Indigenous women and their children, who they are taking away from. They're taking away these children at an alarming rate, and it's not getting any better. It's getting more expensive. I want to invest in those moms and those children so they stay together. That's what I believe in. That's why we did this bond.
Wally Law and Connexus cannot deal with all of the families that need assistance to do the kind of programming that Dawn's been running. So what's the next step?
We did actually meet with, I did actually meet with some folks from social service today. Once the bond is done and completed, not this June, but the end of next June, we have the ability to keep 6 mothers, up to 6 mothers and 10 children. It's mostly based on the children. What we're going to need to keep this funding, or this program running for a whole year for 16, $100,000 a year. That's a pretty good investment in our community and in our family. Isn't it? Isn't that cheap? But you can do better for public service. Sorry.
When I left Saskatchewan, it was a half-not province. And not because I left, for other reasons, I think, it turned into a half province. And there was a number of years when the government had money coming out of its ears from oil revenue, potash revenue, all of the stuff that the revenue was coming in from. And then we get this list of the social problems that Saskatchewan now has, that are bigger and longer list than when I left, when it was a half-not province.
That's not true.
I don't,
Sorry.
I'm quoting our fellow panelists here. And my point is that if we're going to invest in people in a genuine way, it shouldn't be through little experiments here and there. I think that what you've done is wonderful. And I think what you've done is wonderful. That's not the point. The point is, as a social policy, does it make sense to try and change the fabric of Saskatchewan with 100 people here and 100 people there, when somehow all of that wealth that came into the province was squandered on something and didn't actually help the people of the province? It seems to me that's a question.
Well, I can disagree, because since when we were a half province, we used to have, under the previous government, I think we had 4 homes. We now have 15. We look after over 110 mothers, children, and infants at any one time. So that's not true. There was a lot of investments made.
But we need to help thousands, right?
But you know what, starts at 1. That's what we got to start. 1, because when you start 1, then it leads to 2, then it leads to 3. That's this whole thing. There is no quick fix, silver bullet answer here. This is one tool in the toolbox. When government doesn't have the money, or government squandered the money, or whatever they did with it,
Or chose not to have money.
or chose not to have the money, sure. And the more money we save, the more we can reinvest. Hopefully you guys sound like I believe in
Yeah, there's
something.
we take some questions? Yeah. Sorry, the gentleman in the back is,
I thought the role of government was to look after the people to start off. Am I wrong, Mr. Politician or Mr. Deputy Minister or whatever you are?
We need problem solvers. We got big issues. We don't need problem identifiers because we got enough of them. And the reality is the only way we're going to start solving problems is if we do things differently. And that's going to take the public service, it's going to take the private sector, it's going to take the philanthropy sector in connection to fix what the issues of Saskatchewan. We can sit here and blame the government. We're blaming governments for 20 years. How far has that got us?
I'm a little disturbed by how quickly we dismiss the idea of a different tax system. It seems to me that we need to address what is the social responsibility, the public responsibility for social issues. We have been brainwashed to think we can't afford taxes. but we can afford the investments because they will get its profit.
You know what, it's an interesting little factoid that in the United States where Trump brought in this huge tax cut that was supposed to be so popular, the majority of Americans don't want it. They're saying that's a bad mistake. You're going the wrong direction.
Yeah.
So it's not true that taxes are always a bad political move. Not true.
It's to make sure that we have the data to focus on the things that we actually can do that make a difference. And that's something that social finance and SIBs and stuff is actually pretty good at.
What you're doing is not the average social impact point. I'm not even sure that you really belong in the defender of social impact point category, because what you're doing is not what we've seen on the screen. What we've seen on the screen is people making big money from delivering public services, and what it does is it takes money away from the general average needs of the population and delivers it to a group that a capitalist organization has decided is the one that is going to get the benefits.
The social impact bond isn't everything, but it's a tool that worked. When we had no money, it's showing that it's made a difference. I think it'd be political suicide for the government of Saskatchewan not to continue to fund a social impact bond that works. Why do they work? It's straightforward, there's a monetary value, and I don't give a shit about the money, I give a shit about the people. And I see, universities becoming a norm at Sweet Dreams. It's not just a one-off where we celebrate, it's becoming a norm, people. And that's what we want. We want our moms and our children educated and living interdependently.
So when you break this down, you always hear this buzzwords. 1% of the people spend 33% of the budget. You don't know if it's true. So we form a healthy families unit and we try to figure it out. And then we find Nana. Nana's in Regina. She's got 4 children. She's 56 years old. One's got an acquired brain injury through criminal activity. One's a career criminal. The other 2 been in every system. 19 children and 2 grandchildren. That family, you can predict it. It's got fetal alcohol. It's got every issue in relation to poverty, violence, domestic violence, and the list goes on. Very predictable. We know that, right? What we also know is that families receive one source of income for 32 years, a social assistance check. What we also know is that family is costing us $5 to $7 million a year right now. And what we also know that we can project better than our RSPs, that family is going to cost us $17 to $19 million in the next 8 to 12 years if we don't intervene and change the impact or change the path. What we also know is that we project that we have 2,500 of those families in Saskatchewan. Billions.
So where do you go with that?
You got to address it at the point of that is we need all hands on deck to solve the problem, and we don't need a bunch of people blaming each other.
Well, including that family.
Well, yeah, having that kind of information, I think, is important, for sure.
So it's going upstream. So we have the Healthy Families Unit, which is basically working with them, one agency at a time, take Unite, take Dawn's group, and rather than 13 workers, they have 1. So you actually connect them to services. 7 outcomes, get the ones employed that can get employed, get them in school, get them addiction training, and that's what it's about.
But if I could just, if you ask 98% of the public sector workers in Canada, do they have any idea of how to do their job better and more effectively for the population? Most of them would say yes, they do. I mean, this isn't sort of like the innovation is going to come from over there, and these public sector workers are so stuck in their ways that they can never change. Most of the people who go in the public sector do it because they believe in the work. And a lot of them are getting hamstrung by rules. So let's not focus on change coming only from the outside of the public sector. It should also come from the inside.
I've said that about 5 times. I agree with you.
Oh, no, well, stronger than that.
But Dale has mentioned, there's no private investment there, right? Not with the hubs, not with the healthy families.
The point is for scale and for size and to do that, we need all hands on deck because there's another reason that the private sector is involved. These are future employees that we need to get ready to work because to grow the economy, you need employees.
My name is Bonnie Morton. I work with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry, and I've been in this ministry for over 30 years doing the same work. I am one of those ladies that you have helped, not your organization. But I'm a product of a system that worked so that we didn't have to piecemeal it for people. We didn't have to put it out so we only have 1 here and 1 here. The system worked for us all. Then we started talking about redesign. What redesign meant was cutting back. We talk about what workers need to be doing to assist their client. When I was on the system myself, my social caseworker, or my social worker's caseload was so low that that man could actually sit with me and say, okay, here are some options for you, and help me go from here to there. Did I get off that system in a year? No, it took me over 7.5 years. But with his help, I was able to move forward. I went from a grade 5 to a Bachelor of Human Justice in 7.5 years. I hope I will never ever have to be on that program, but there's no guarantee. Because soon I'm going to have to retire, I'll be a senior, which throws me back into poverty. We do need to talk about taxation and how we do it, and the redistribution of the money. And do we really want to invest it in people? We need our roads, we need all that other stuff as well. There are priorities that we have to set. But first and foremost, we have to come back, instead of looking at the profit some corporation is going to make, helping our government to do what they should be doing in the first place. We actually need to look at, where do we stand socially? What is our commitment to the people in our province? Redesign is nothing more than cutting back. We talk about needing more workers. A few years ago, we lost 40 social workers across the province. What that meant was their caseloads landed on the shoulders of other workers. So we can't blame public service for not doing the job. I've watched over this 30 years how government walks away, and it's not just the SAS party, the NDP did it as well, walking away from social responsibility to people in our communities and leaving it to others to take care of. I watch the vindictiveness of corporate attacks on poor people, and I watch even the vindictiveness of charity in our community. It only serves a few, and there are many that need the help. So, as far as I'm concerned, we need to be looking at a bigger, broader base than something like social impact bonds, because it's not going to do a big job.
And you need to tell us, and this is my point, what? What? What is it? What is the magic bullet answer?
Taxation.
Taxation.
She told us
You know
about
what?
it.
It's not just taxation, it's what are our moral values in this province? And we don't just leave it up to government members and bureaucrats to do it. We as the population have to come together and say, this is our moral value, and to direct our government officials what to do.
I think our government tried to do that, and I know in Saskatoon they were on the TV getting slaughtered every day for raising taxes, right? Raising taxes on the poor, raising taxes. You know what? I got staff, I got 180 staff, and I've had staff that have lived off the food bank because they don't make enough money.
Every one of the people I work with live off the food bank.
Huh?
Every one of the people I work with live off the food bank.
I'm
No
just
other
saying.
option. And it's all due to cutbacks.
Blair is looking at me, we have to go. Thank you for participating in the discussion, and if you do have more to say,
busy when you
please go and fill out your survey and let us know what you think.